You shame me! Mamie!
I never thought I'd cancel a check meant for my own granddaughter, but life has a way of showing you exactly where you stand when you least expect it. My name is Virginia Harlow, Ginny to the few who still care, and at 72 years old, I just discovered that 4 decades of sacrifice can be erased by 5 simple words. You shame me, Grandma, please. Those words struck like a physical blow as I stood there in my Sunday best, arms outstretched toward my granddaughter Madison at her law school graduation. My beige dress and sensible shoes suddenly felt like a prison uniform under the judgmental stares of her friends. The silver brooch I'd polished that morning, my mother's, passed down through generations, felt heavy and antiquated against my chest. Around us, families embraced amid the sea of black graduation gowns and flying caps. But my Maddie stepped back, her perfectly made-up face twisting into something between embarrassment and disgust. "Not here," she whispered harshly. "Just wait by the car, please." Spring in Portland had never felt so cold. I still remember holding newborn Maddie in my arms, her tiny fingers curling around mine while I promised to always be there for her. Back then, I was working night shifts at Providence Portland Medical Center, often coming straight from 12 hours on my feet to babysit so my daughter Olivia could climb the corporate ladder. Howard, my ex-husband, had already left us by then, trading 40 years of marriage for Camilla, a woman nearly half his age with expensive tastes and a talent for making him feel young again. The graduation ceremony should have been my moment of pride. Instead, it became my awakening. $47,000 sat in a check in my purse, representing years of overtime shifts, holidays worked, and simple pleasures denied. Money I'd saved while living in my modest 2-bedroom apartment, driving a 10-year-old Honda and buying clothes from discount stores. All so Maddie could start her life without the burden of debt. All so she could have what I never did, freedom and opportunity. But as I retreated to my car as instructed, something shifted inside me. The obedient, self-sacrificing nurse who had spent a lifetime putting others first suddenly questioned everything. I watched through the windshield as Maddie posed for photos with Howard and Camilla, her mother Olivia standing awkwardly at the edge of their perfect family portrait. I was excluded from the frame, an embarrassing footnote in their glamorous narrative. I waited 3 hours in that parking lot. The celebration moved to an expensive restaurant where I wasn't invited. My phone remained silent, except for a terse text from Maddie. "Grandma, just go home. We'll catch up tomorrow at the party." The party. The one I had arranged and paid for at the River Place Hotel. The one where I was supposed to present her with the check that represented my life savings, minus what I needed to barely survive on my nurse's pension. During those hours alone in my car, memories flooded back. The time I'd stayed up all night making Madison's costume for the school play after Olivia forgot. The weekends I'd taken her when her parents were too busy with their careers. The college application essays I'd helped her revise while she complained about my outdated grammar. The chicken soup delivered to her dorm when she had the flu freshman year, requiring me to take a bus across town because I couldn't afford the taxi. By the time I drove home, something had crystallized within me. I sat at my kitchen table, the check flat before me, and recalled a patient I'd cared for years ago. Edith was her name. A widow who had given everything to her children only to be placed in a nursing home and rarely visited. "Don't make my mistake, Ginny," she told me once. "They'll take until there's nothing left if you let them." The next morning, I called the bank and placed a stop payment on the check. My hands trembled as I made the call, but my voice remained steady. When the bank representative asked if I wanted to issue a replacement, I said no. When she asked if there was a problem, I simply said, "Yes, but I'm fixing it now." I didn't realize Olivia had let herself into my apartment until I heard her sharp intake of breath behind me. "Mom, what are you doing?" Her voice carried that familiar tone, the one that treated me like a confused child rather than a woman who had survived more life than she had yet lived. I hung up the phone and turned to face my daughter. The resemblance between us had faded over the years as she embraced Howard's world of premium skincare, subtle cosmetic procedures, and designer clothing. Looking at her was like seeing the ghost of my younger self, remade in Howard's preferred image. "I'm making a change," I said simply. Please tell me you're not canceling Maddie's check. Olivia's perfectly manicured hand flew to her throat, a gesture so reminiscent of Camilla that it made me flinch. I am. Because she asked you to wait by the car? Mom, you can't be serious. You know how important appearances are to her right now. She's trying to secure a position at Brennan and White. Howard's friends were there, Camilla's friends' children. I held up my hand, the same one that had soothed countless patients through pain and fear. She said I shame her, Olivia. Olivia had the decency to look away, her silence confirming she knew. Perhaps she'd even agreed. She's young, she finally offered weakly. She didn't mean it. She meant it. And that money is mine. I earned it saving lives while you and Howard were building your perfect worlds. I think it's time I used it for myself. Yourself? The concept seemed foreign to her, as if I existed only in relation to what I could provide the family. What would you even do with that kind of money? The question hung in the air between us. What would I do? For so long, my identity had been defined by service to others. As a nurse, a wife, a mother, a grandmother. The possibility of choosing for myself was terrifying and exhilarating. I don't know yet, I admitted, but I'm going to find out. Olivia left in a flurry of threats and pleas, promising that Howard would call me, as if her father still held any power over my decisions. I sat in my quiet apartment afterwards, surrounded by decades of modest living. The faded sofa where I'd read Maddie bedtime stories. The scratched kitchen table where I'd helped her with homework. The walls that hadn't seen fresh paint in 15 years because every extra dollar went into her fund. That evening, as spring rain tapped gently against my windows, I poured myself a glass of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion and opened my laptop. The balance in my account, now safely unallocated, seemed to pulse with possibility. Where does a 72-year-old woman begin again? My finger hovered over the keyboard, uncertain what to search for. Travel, education, housing? The options seemed limitless and overwhelming after decades of rigid self-denial. A text message interrupted my thoughts, the phone buzzing angrily on the table beside me. It was from Maddie. Grandma, Mom told me what you did. I can't believe you're being so petty and vindictive. That money was promised to me. I was counting on it. No apology, no recognition, just entitlement. I didn't respond. Instead, I found myself typing solo travel for seniors into the search bar, then continuing education nursing, then waterfront apartments Portland. Each search felt like a small rebellion, a reclamation of possibilities I'd surrendered long ago. Another text arrived, this one from Howard. Virginia, this childish behavior is beneath you. We need to talk about your responsibilities to the family. Responsibilities to the family. As if I hadn't fulfilled those 1,000 times over while he was building his new life with Camilla. As if I hadn't worked Christmas days and Thanksgiving nights so that patients wouldn't die alone while he was skiing in Aspen or sailing in the Caribbean. I closed my phone without responding and continued my searches. By midnight, my wine was gone and my notepad was filled with possibilities. A Mediterranean cruise departing from Barcelona. A certificate program in art therapy. A small but sunny apartment overlooking the Willamette River. Each option represented a door I could now open with the key I'd almost given away. Sleep came easier that night than it had in years. The guilt that had been my constant companion, guilt for not giving enough, doing enough, being enough, had begun to recede. In its place was something unfamiliar, but welcome, anticipation. Morning brought a pounding at my door that could only be Howard. I considered not answering, but decided against it. This confrontation was inevitable, and I'd faced far worse in my years as an emergency room nurse. I opened the door to find him standing there in his golf clothes, clearly interrupted on his way to the country club. At 74, he still maintained the confident posture of a man accustomed to getting his way. His silver hair was expertly cut, his tan suspiciously even for Portland in spring. Behind him in the building's parking lot, I could see Camilla waiting in their Mercedes, sunglasses on despite the cloudy day. Virginia, he began, using my full name as he always did, a subtle reminder of the distance he preferred to maintain. We need to discuss this nonsense about the check. I didn't invite him in. There's nothing to discuss, Howard. The money is mine. His expression darkened. That money was promised to Madison for her future. You can't just change your mind because your feelings got hurt. She's building connections that could secure her entire career. Connections with people who think I'm something to be ashamed of? He had the grace to look uncomfortable. No one said that. Madison did. To my face. At her graduation. Howard sighed, adopting the patronizing tone he'd perfected over the years. You know how young people are. Image matters in their world. Your approach to life is different, more economical. You mean poor, I translated flatly. Working class. The thing you've spent your entire life trying to escape. That's not fair. None of this is fair, Howard. It wasn't fair when you left me after I put you through business school. It wasn't fair when you missed Olivia's birthdays for business trips. And it's certainly not fair that Madison thinks she deserves my life savings after treating me like something shameful. He shifted tactics, his voice softening to the persuasive tone he used to close deals. Ginny, be reasonable. What are you going to do with that money at your age? Travel? You've never even been out of the country. Start a business? You've only ever been a nurse. This is Madison's future we're talking about. And what about my future? I asked, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. Howard blinked, genuinely confused. Your future? Ginny, you're 72. The dismissal in those 3 words, you're 72, was the final confirmation I needed. To Howard, to Olivia, to Madison, I was already as good as gone. A resource to be drained, then discarded. My remaining years were inconsequential compared to Madison's boundless potential. Yes, I'm 72, I agreed. Which means I don't have time to waste on people who don't value me. Goodbye, Howard. I closed the door on his protests and leaned against it, heart pounding but mind clear. Through the door, I heard him call me selfish, unreasonable, vindictive. Words designed to push me back into my place of silent sacrifice. But something had shifted permanently inside me. The woman who had endured decades of invisibility had finally seen herself clearly, and she refused to disappear again. When the sound of Howard's expensive shoes retreated down the hallway, I returned to my laptop and the list I'd made the night before. The Mediterranean cruise that had seemed like an impossible fantasy now beckoned as a first step. 8 countries in 16 days, departing in 3 weeks. The perfect amount of time for my family to adjust to our new reality. I booked it without hesitation, the familiar anxiety about spending money on myself flaring briefly before subsiding under a new determination. Then I called Ruth, my oldest friend, and the only person besides family who might notice my absence. You did what? Ruth's delighted laughter filled my ear when I explained about the check and the cruise. Ginny Harlow, it's about damn time. I've been telling you for years they were taking advantage. I know. I just couldn't see it until Madison made it impossible to ignore. So what's the plan after the cruise? You're not going to let them pressure you into giving in, are you? I looked around my apartment, the home I'd made comfortable but never quite made beautiful. No. I'm thinking about moving, maybe taking some classes. I've always wanted to learn about art therapy. Well, count me in for whatever parts of this adventure you want company for, Ruth said firmly. My retirement fund is healthy, and Richard would have wanted me to enjoy it. A surge of gratitude warmed me. Ruth had lost her husband 5 years ago, but had built a vibrant life as a widow, something I'd secretly envied. While I was still catering to my family's demands, she was taking cooking classes and volunteering at the art museum. I might take you up on that, I said. It would be nice not to go it alone entirely. That's what friends are for. And Ginny, I'm proud of you. It takes courage to stand up for yourself, especially when you're not in the habit. After we hung up, I made myself a cup of tea and sat by my small balcony window, watching spring rain give way to tentative sunshine. The party for Madison was supposed to be tomorrow evening. Dozens of guests invited. A cake ordered. A venue paid for in full. I picked up my phone and sent a group text to Howard, Olivia, and Madison. The graduation party is canceled. I'm sure you'll understand, given the circumstances. I've paid for the venue, so feel free to use it if you wish. I'll be making other arrangements for my time. Then I silenced my phone and began making a packing list for the Mediterranean. Italy, Greece, Croatia, places I'd only ever seen in movies or magazines. Places where no one knew me as just a grandmother or an ex-wife or a retired nurse. places where I could finally begin to discover who Virginia Harlow might become when she valued herself as much as she'd valued everyone else. The thought both terrified and thrilled me. But one thing was certain. I would never again allow anyone, not even my beloved granddaughter, to make me feel ashamed of who I was. That woman was gone forever, canceled along with the check that had nearly cost me my final chance at a life of my own. The Mediterranean sun felt different than Oregon's tentative warmth, more confident, more generous with its light. Standing on the deck of the cruise ship as it pulled away from Barcelona's harbor, I felt a strange mixture of terror and exhilaration. 3 weeks earlier, I'd been waiting obediently in a parking lot while my family celebrated without me. Now, I was sailing toward horizons I'd only ever seen in travel documentaries. My cabin was small but comfortable, with a narrow balcony where I could sit and watch the sea. I'd splurged on the ocean view, justifying it as necessary therapy after decades of economizing. The first night, I sat there until nearly midnight, mesmerized by the moonlight on the water and the distant glow of coastal towns. For the first time in years, no one needed me to be anywhere or do anything. The sensation was dizzying. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I kept reaching for my phone, half expecting frantic messages from Olivia or manipulative texts from Howard. But I'd made a decision before boarding. My phone would remain off for the duration of the cruise. Whatever crisis my family manufactured in my absence would have to be handled without me. The thought both liberated and frightened me. Like removing a cast after months of immobilization, the freedom felt precarious. Breakfast the next morning was a solitary affair until an elegant silver-haired woman approached my table. "Mind if I join you? The maitre d' says we're both traveling solo." Her name was Josephine, a retired literature professor from Boston who had been widowed 3 years earlier. Unlike me, she'd been traveling extensively since her husband's death. "After Philip died, our children expected me to move closer to them," she explained over coffee. "They had my life all planned out. A nice little apartment near their suburban homes, weekly dinners with the grandchildren, occasional babysitting duty. It was thoughtful in its way. But you didn't want that, I guessed, recognizing the familiar pattern. I wanted to see Venice before the rising seas claim it. I wanted to walk through the Louvre without rushing. I wanted to make my own choices while I still could." She smiled, the Mediterranean sun catching the gold flecks in her hazel eyes. They were shocked when I sold the house and bought a smaller place in Boston's Back Bay. Even more shocked when I started traveling 3 months out of every year. By afternoon, Josephine had introduced me to her cruise family, 5 other solo travelers who had connected on previous voyages and reunited for this one. There was Richard, a retired judge from Toronto with a passion for photography. Elena, a former ballet dancer from Chicago with a mischievous smile. Martin, a widower from London who had once owned a chain of bookshops. Diane, a never-married former executive from San Francisco. And Bernard, a French chef who had closed his restaurant after a heart attack scare 2 years earlier. "We're the late bloomers," Elena explained with a wink as we gathered for dinner. All discovering new lives after society expected us to quietly disappear. The term resonated with me. Late bloomers. Was that what I was becoming? The possibility seemed both ridiculous and thrilling. At 72, with arthritic knees and thinning hair, was I really on the verge of blooming? Our ship docked in Naples the next day. I'd intended to take the organized shore excursion, a carefully guided tour with minimal walking and frequent rest stops, designed for seniors. Instead, I found myself joining the late bloomers for their self-planned adventure through the city's historic center. "You'll need better shoes," Diane assessed, eyeing my sensible nursing sneakers. "And a hat. The Italian sun is merciless." Before I knew it, I was being whisked into a boutique near the port, where Elena insisted on helping me select a wide-brimmed straw hat and a pair of comfortable but stylish walking sandals. When I protested the expense, Martin waved away my concerns. "My dear, what exactly are you saving for now? The children's inheritance. Spend it all, I say. Leave them the bill for the funeral and nothing more." Their laughter was infectious, and I found myself joining in, though a lifetime of frugality made the purchases feel vaguely sinful. I had to remind myself repeatedly that this money was mine, earned through night shifts and missed holidays, saved for a purpose that no longer existed. Naples unfolded around us in a riot of color, sound, and sensation. The narrow streets buzzing with scooters, the washing hung between ancient buildings, the smell of pizza from wood-fired ovens. It was overwhelming and intoxicating. I'd spent so long in antiseptic hospital corridors and then in my quiet apartment that the vibrancy of the city felt almost assaultive. "Breathe," Josephine advised, noticing my overwhelm. "It gets easier. Your senses adjust." We ate lunch in a tiny restaurant where no English was spoken, and the menu was incomprehensible to me. Bernard ordered for the table in fluent Italian, and we feasted on dishes I couldn't pronounce but would never forget. Pasta so fresh it seemed alive, tomatoes that tasted like sunshine, wine that made my head spin pleasantly. "To the late bloomers," Richard toasted, raising his glass. "And to our newest member, Ginny, who had the courage to rewrite her story." I blushed under their approving gazes. They didn't know the details. I hadn't shared Madison's cruel words or Howard's dismissal or the canceled check, but somehow they recognized in me a kindred spirit, someone emerging from the chrysalis of obligation into uncertain freedom. That night, slightly sunburned and exhausted in the best possible way, I fell into a dreamless sleep, lulled by the gentle rocking of the ship as it sailed toward our next destination. For the first time since Howard left me 15 years earlier, I didn't feel lonely in my solitude. The days began to blur together in the most wonderful way. Pompeii, with its haunting ruins and the ghostly remnants of lives, suddenly interrupted. The Amalfi Coast, where we hired a private boat and swam in water so clear it seemed like liquid crystal. Rome, where the ancient Colosseum made my problems seem microscopic against the vast sweep of history. In Athens, we visited the Acropolis, climbing the steep marble steps that had been polished by millions of feet over thousands of years. My knees protested, but I refused to turn back, determined to reach the Parthenon at the summit. When I finally stood among its weathered columns, gazing out at the sprawling modern city below, tears sprang unexpectedly to my eyes. Overwhelming, isn't it? Martin appeared beside me, his own eyes suspiciously bright. All that beauty and history and human striving makes you wonder what you've been doing with your life. Yes, I admitted. I keep thinking about all the years I spent worrying about things that seem so small now. That's the gift of travel, especially at our age, he said. Perspective, the realization that the world is so much larger than our little dramas. Later, in a taverna tucked away from the tourist areas, I found myself sharing my story with the group. The graduation, Madison's cruel dismissal, the canceled check, my family's outrage. The words poured out of me, loosened by Greek wine, and the sympathetic faces around the table. "Good for you," Diane said fiercely when I finished. "I've watched too many women in my generation give and give until there's nothing left. Then they're discarded when they're no longer useful. I feel guilty sometimes," I confessed, "like I've abandoned my responsibilities." "What responsibilities?" Bernard's French accent became more pronounced with his indignation. "To be a convenient ATM for an ungrateful granddaughter? To be invisible until needed? Non, ma chérie. Your only responsibility now is to yourself." Their validation washed over me like a healing balm. These strangers turned friends saw what my family couldn't, or wouldn't, that I was still a person with desires and dignity, not merely a support function for their lives. In Croatia, we wandered through Dubrovnik's medieval walls, marveling at the ancient stone fortress and the perfect blue of the Adriatic Sea beyond. Elena insisted we all try swimming off a small pebble beach near the city. I hesitated, self-conscious about my aging body in a swimsuit. "No one is looking at you," Josephine whispered gently, "and if they do, they'll only see a woman brave enough to enjoy her life." The water was bracingly cold, but exhilarating. I floated on my back, face to the sun, and felt a strange sensation spreading through my chest, something I eventually recognized as joy, pure and uncomplicated. When had I last felt such a thing? Before Howard left? Before Olivia grew distant? Before nursing became more about paperwork than patient care? That night, in my cabin, I broke my own rule and turned on my phone. The deluge was immediate. 23 missed calls, dozens of text messages, several voicemails. I scrolled through them with a detached curiosity, as if reading about a stranger's drama. "Olivia, Mom, You can't just disappear like this. We're worried sick. Call me immediately. Howard. Virginia, this behavior is completely irresponsible. Madison's party was a disaster. She's devastated. Madison. Grandma, I can't believe you'd ruin my graduation like this. I didn't mean what I said. Please call me back. The last message caught my attention. It had been sent just 2 days earlier. Madison. Grandma, Mom told me you're on a cruise. I hope you're okay. I'm sorry about what happened at graduation. Can we talk when you get back? An apology, of sorts. Or perhaps just another attempt to secure the money she believed should be hers. Either way, it no longer felt as important as it once might have. The urgent family crisis I'd imagined during sleepless nights hadn't materialized. They were surprised, annoyed, perhaps even concerned, but they were managing without me, just as I was managing without them. I turned the phone off again without responding. There would be time for reconciliation, or not, when I returned. For now, I wanted to remain fully present in my adventure, undiluted by family complications. The cruise continued eastward, each day bringing new discoveries. In Santorini, we rode donkeys up the steep cliffside path to the whitewashed town above. In Mykonos, we got blissfully lost in the labyrinthine streets, where every wrong turn revealed another postcard-perfect view. In Corfu, we rented scooters, and I surprised myself by mastering the controls despite never having driven one before. "You're a natural," Richard praised as I navigated a winding coastal road. "I'm terrified," I admitted, gripping the handlebars with white knuckles. "The best adventures always involve a little terror," he replied with a smile. It was during our final stop in Venice that I made a decision that would have been unthinkable 3 weeks earlier. We were sitting in a cafe on the Grand Canal, watching gondolas glide past as the setting sun turned the ancient buildings golden. "I don't want to go back yet," I said suddenly. My new friends exchanged glances, and Elena smiled knowingly. "None of us ever do, darling." "No, I mean it. I don't want to go back to Portland. Not right away." "So don't," Diane said simply. "Where would you like to go instead?" The question stopped me short. Where would I like to go? No one had asked me that in decades, and I'd stopped asking myself. I'd been so focused on survival and sacrifice that desires had become luxuries I couldn't afford. "I don't know," I admitted. "I haven't thought that far ahead." "Well, some of us are continuing to Tuscany after this," Martin offered. "We've rented a villa in a little hill town for 2 weeks. There's an extra bedroom if you'd care to join us." The invitation hung in the air like a lifeline. 2 more weeks away from Portland, away from the confrontations that awaited me, away from decisions about what came next. 2 more weeks to discover who Ginny Harlow might become. "I couldn't impose," I protested weakly. "Impose?" Bernard scoffed. "You would be doing us a favor. We need someone sensible to balance out this group of misfits." Their laughter warmed me, as did the realization that they genuinely wanted my company. Not for what I could give them or do for them, but simply for who I was. The feeling was so novel, it almost hurt. "You don't have to decide right now," Josephine said kindly. "Think about it tonight. See how it feels." Back in my cabin, I opened the sliding door to my little balcony and sat listening to the water lapping against the ship. Venice's lights twinkled in the distance, like stars fallen to earth. In my hand, I held the return ticket to Portland, a commitment to resume my old life, to face my family's recriminations, to begin the process of redefining our relationships under new terms. Or I could set it aside. I could step further into this strange new territory, this late-blooming life that had opened before me. My pension would continue to be deposited monthly. My apartment was paid through the end of the year. My plants were being watered by my neighbor. Nothing and no one required my immediate return. The thought was dizzying. Freedom vertigo, Josephine had called it once. The disorientation that comes when you suddenly realize all the barriers were self-imposed. I took out my phone and turned it on one more time. Instead of checking messages, I opened the camera and took a selfie against the backdrop of Venice at night. My face looked different somehow, more relaxed, slightly tanned from days in the Mediterranean sun. I was smiling in a way I hadn't in photos for years, a genuine smile that reached my eyes. Before I could reconsider, I sent the photo to Madison with a brief message. "I'm learning to live without shame. I hope you are too. I'll be in touch when I'm ready. Then I turned off the phone, tucked my return ticket into my suitcase, and began mentally reorganizing my limited wardrobe for an extended stay in Tuscany. Tomorrow, I would tell my friends I was accepting their invitation. Tomorrow, I would take another step away from the woman who had waited obediently in a parking lot, and toward the woman smiling back at me from the photograph. The night air carried the faint sounds of music from somewhere in Venice, perhaps a restaurant, perhaps a private celebration. I closed my eyes and let it wash over me, no longer fighting the unfamiliar happiness expanding in my chest. For so long, I'd believed my story was reaching its conclusion. Now I understood it was simply turning to a new chapter, one I would write myself, word by unexpected word. Tuscany in early summer unfurled before me like a Renaissance painting come to life. Rolling hills striped with vineyards and olive groves. Cypress trees standing sentinel along winding roads. Medieval stone villages perched on hilltops as if time had forgotten to claim them. The villa my new friends had rented sat just outside a small town called Montepulciano, its terracotta roof and weathered stone walls blending seamlessly into the ancient landscape. "Home for the next 2 weeks," Martin announced as our rented van climbed the steep driveway. Not quite the luxury of the cruise ship, but authentic Italian country living. He was being modest. The villa was rustic but beautiful, with thick walls that kept the interior cool despite the June heat. Terracotta tile floors worn smooth by generations of feet, and windows framing views that no photograph could do justice. My bedroom had a small balcony overlooking a valley of vineyards, with distant hills shimmering in the heat haze. That first evening, as we gathered around a long wooden table on the terrace for dinner, I felt a curious sensation, like watching myself from a distance. Virginia Harlow, retired nurse from Portland, sitting in Tuscany with a glass of local wine, laughing with people she hadn't known a month ago. The incongruity of it almost made me dizzy. "To impulsive decisions," Josephine toasted, raising her glass toward me. "May they always lead us exactly where we didn't know we needed to be." The meal that followed was simple but extraordinary. Pasta made that morning by a local woman Bernard had somehow befriended within hours of our arrival. Vegetables from a nearby farm, wine from a vineyard visible from our terrace. We ate as the sun set, talking and laughing as stars gradually populated the darkening sky. No one checked their phones. No one mentioned appointments or obligations. We existed fully in that moment, present in a way I'd forgotten was possible. Our days fell into a gentle rhythm. Mornings began slowly, with coffee and pastries from the town bakery. Sometimes we ventured out together, exploring neighboring villages or visiting wineries. Other times we separated, following individual interests. Elena found a local pottery studio and began taking lessons. Richard disappeared for hours with his camera, returning with stunning images of the landscape. Diane discovered a passion for Italian cooking, apprenticing herself to our neighbor who supplied the fresh pasta. I often walked alone, following ancient paths between olive groves, getting deliberately lost and found again. The freedom to wander without purpose was intoxicating after decades of structured responsibility. I began sketching in a notebook I'd purchased in Venice, capturing rough impressions of flowers, buildings, distant hills. The results were amateurish but deeply satisfying, connecting me to a creative impulse I'd abandoned sometime in my youth. One morning, about a week into our stay, I woke early and decided to walk into town for fresh bread. The streets were quiet, locals just beginning to open shops and sweep doorways. At a small cafe on the main square, I ordered coffee in my rudimentary Italian and sat watching the town come to life. "Signora, your phone," the waiter said in heavily accented English, pointing to my pocket where my phone had begun to vibrate. I'd turned it on periodically, usually at night, scrolling through messages from home with increasing detachment. Olivia's tone had shifted from demanding to concerned. Howard's from authoritative to conciliatory. Madison's messages remained sporadic and self-centered, though there were moments of what seemed like genuine remorse buried within her complaints. This call, however, wasn't from family. It was Ruth, my oldest friend from Portland, the one person I'd emailed with my whereabouts. "Ginny, thank God." Her voice came through, slightly breathless. "I've been trying to reach you for days. What's wrong?" Alarm tightened my chest. Ruth wouldn't call without reason. "It's not an emergency," she assured me quickly. "But you should know. Howard's been calling everyone, trying to track you down. He even came to my house. He's saying you've had some kind of breakdown, that the family is considering legal options to protect your assets since you've displayed questionable judgment." The beautiful Tuscan morning suddenly felt colder. Legal options? What does that mean? From what I gather, they're talking about having you declared incompetent. Olivia mentioned to a mutual friend that they're concerned about early dementia given your erratic behavior. Anger flashed through me, hot and clarifying. "I'm not having a breakdown. I'm having a vacation." "I know that," Ruth said soothingly. "Anyone who knows you knows that. But Howard's convinced some people that you've gone off the deep end, emptying your bank account, disappearing without notice, canceling Madison's party. He's spinning it as worrying behavior from a woman who was always stable and predictable." That last part stung because it contained a kernel of truth. I had been stable and predictable, to a fault. My spontaneity muscles had atrophied through years of putting others' needs first. To those who knew only that version of me, my recent choices might indeed seem alarming. "What should I do?" I asked, watching an old Italian man carefully arranging flowers outside his shop across the square, his movements deliberate and unhurried. "Come home," Ruth said simply. "Not because they're right, but because you need to protect yourself. Fight this head on before they build a case against you. I have a cousin who's an elder law attorney. She says they don't have a leg to stand on if you're demonstrably of sound mind, but ignoring legal notices won't help your case." "Legal notices? Have they actually filed something?" "Not yet, as far as I know. But Howard's been meeting with his attorney. You know how he is. He hates losing control." After we hung up, I sat staring at my coffee, now cold and forgotten. The beautiful Tuscan morning continued around me, shopkeepers greeting each other, tourists beginning to appear with maps and cameras, church bells marking the hour. But my mind was back in Portland, imagining Howard and Olivia discussing my mental competence with doctors and lawyers. The injustice of it burned in my chest. I'd spent my entire adult life being responsible, raising a child alone after Howard left, working full-time while caring for aging parents, saving diligently for retirement and for Madison's future. One act of self-determination, and suddenly I was unstable, possibly demented, in need of supervision. When I returned to the villa, my friends were gathered around the breakfast table on the terrace. One look at my face, and conversation halted. "What's happened?" Josephine asked, pulling out a chair for me. I told them everything: Ruth's call, Howard's accusations, the threat of legal action. As I spoke, I watched their expressions shift from concern to outrage. "Outrageous," Bernard declared, his accent thickening with emotion. "To question your sanity because you choose to live? C'est ridicule." "Unfortunately, it's not uncommon," Diane said grimly. "I've seen it in my corporate life. When women step out of their assigned roles, especially older women, the system rushes to pathologize them. We're allowed to be caregivers, companions, supporters, but autonomous beings with our own desires? That threatens the social order." "What will you do?" Martin asked gently. "I have to go back," I said, the words tasting bitter. "I can't fight this from 5,000 miles away." "When?" I considered the question. My instinct was to rush, to handle the crisis immediately as I'd always done. But something had shifted in me over these weeks away. The perpetual urgency that had governed my life, the feeling that others' needs always constituted an emergency requiring my immediate attention, had begun to recede. Not today, I decided. Not tomorrow either. I'll book a flight for next week after our time here is finished. If Howard wants to declare me incompetent, he can wait until I've had my 2 weeks in Tuscany. Their approval was palpable, warming me like sunshine after rain. These people who barely knew me understood something my family never had, that my time and choices were as valuable as anyone else's, that my life belonged to me. The conversation shifted to practical matters. Richard, who had practiced law before becoming a judge, offered advice about documenting my mental competence. Elena suggested contacting my former nursing colleagues for statements about my professional judgment. Josephine, ever the professor, recommended keeping a detailed journal to demonstrate clear thinking. "And get a full medical workup as soon as you return," Diane added. "Physical, neurological, cognitive." Everything. Documentation is your best defense. Their support wrapped around me like armor. For the first time, I understood that I wasn't just fighting for a vacation, or even for control of my savings. I was fighting for my dignity, for recognition as a full and autonomous human being, rather than an accessory to others' lives. That afternoon, while the others went into town, I sat on my balcony with my phone and composed a careful email to Howard, copying Olivia. I've been informed of your concerns about my mental competence. Let me be absolutely clear. I am of sound mind and body. My decision to travel after Madison's graduation was not impulsive but considered. My decision to redirect my savings toward my own needs after years of self-sacrifice was not irrational but overdue. I will return to Portland on June 15th. Until then, I am enjoying a well-deserved vacation with friends in Italy. Upon my return, I will happily meet with you both, with or without your attorneys present. I will also voluntarily undergo any medical or psychological evaluation you deem necessary to put your concerns to rest. However, be advised that I have retained my own legal counsel to protect my interests. Any attempt to interfere with my financial autonomy or personal freedom will be vigorously contested. I hope we can resolve this matter as the family we once were, rather than as adversaries. But that choice is as much yours as it is mine. Virginia. I read it 3 times before sending, making sure my tone was firm but not antagonistic. Then I forwarded the exchange to Ruth, asking her to connect me with her cousin, the elder law attorney. Finally, I turned off my phone and returned it to my suitcase. The remaining days in Tuscany took on a bittersweet quality, shadowed by the knowledge of what awaited me in Portland, yet somehow more precious because of it. We visited Florence, where the magnificence of the Duomo and the treasures of the Uffizi reminded me how vast the world was beyond my small concerns. We spent an afternoon at a local winery, learning about grapes and soil and tradition from a vintner whose family had worked the same land for 4 centuries. On our final evening, Bernard insisted on cooking for us all, creating a feast that incorporated everything we'd come to love about Tuscan cuisine. As we ate under the stars, Josephine proposed we each share what we were taking home from our time together. "I'll start," she offered. "I'm taking home the certainty that it's never too late to revise your own story. Every one of us has proven that. The knowledge that courage comes in many forms," Richard added. "Sometimes it's as simple as saying yes to an unplanned adventure." "New recipes," Bernard grinned, and the memory of Ginny's face when she tried truffles for the first time. They turned to me expectantly. What was I taking home? The question seemed both simple and impossibly complex. How could I distill these transformative weeks into a neat sentiment? "Myself," I said finally. "I came here as someone's ex-wife, someone's mother, someone's grandmother. I'm going home as Ginny, just Ginny, with all that entails. And for the first time in decades, that feels like enough." Later, packing my suitcase for the journey home, I carefully wrapped the small watercolor painting Martin had done of me sitting by the window, lost in thought. In the image, I looked serene, dignified, complete in myself, the way I felt on my best days here, and the way I hoped to feel in whatever came next. I also packed the business cards my new friends had pressed into my hands, each with invitations for future adventures. Diane's condo in San Francisco, Richard's lake house in Ontario, Elena's apartment in Chicago with its view of Lake Michigan, Josephine's home in Boston, just steps from the public garden, Bernard's pied-à-terre in Paris, Martin's cottage in the Cotswolds. A constellation of possibilities spanning the globe, connecting me to this newfound community of late bloomers. The flight from Rome to Portland was long and uncomfortable, my body protesting the cramped seat and recycled air after weeks of Mediterranean sunshine and freedom. As the plane began its descent, I gazed out the window at the familiar landscape, the green of Oregon forests, the silver ribbon of the Columbia River, the distant white cone of Mount Hood. Home, with all its complications. Ruth was waiting at the airport, her familiar figure a welcome sight amid the crowd. We hugged tightly, and she held me at arm's length, studying my face. "You look different," she declared. "European suits you." "I feel different," I admitted as we walked to her car. "Like I've shed a skin I didn't know was too tight." Well, prepare to have that new skin tested, she warned, navigating through airport traffic. Howard's been calling me daily, asking when you're back. He and Olivia want to meet with you tomorrow. I told them absolutely not. You'd need time to recover from travel. What about Madison? Ruth's expression softened. She called me last week, actually. Not asking about your return or the money, just whether I'd heard from you and if you were okay. She sounded genuinely concerned. A small warmth kindled in my chest at this information. Perhaps there was hope yet for my relationship with my granddaughter, though it would need to be rebuilt on new terms. I've scheduled your medical appointments for next week, Ruth continued, ever practical. Complete physical, cognitive assessment, the works. My cousin Sylvia, the attorney, will meet you on Thursday. She says your case is straightforward. As long as you're demonstrably competent, which you obviously are, Howard doesn't have a legal leg to stand on. My apartment was exactly as I'd left it, though Ruth had added fresh flowers and stocked the refrigerator with essentials. It felt simultaneously familiar and foreign, like a place I'd lived in a previous life. Had it really been only 6 weeks since I'd sat at my kitchen table and canceled Madison's check? It felt like years. That night, jet-lagged and restless, I wandered through the rooms, seeing them with new eyes. The furniture chosen for practicality rather than beauty. The walls devoid of art save for a few family photographs. The bookshelves filled with medical references and mysteries borrowed from the library. A space designed for existing rather than living. It wouldn't do any more. Not for the woman who had sipped espresso in Venetian cafes, who had swum in the Adriatic, who had sketched Tuscan landscapes at dawn. Not for the woman who had discovered, at 72, that she was not at the end of her story, but at the beginning of a new chapter. I made a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching Portland's summer twilight settle over the city. Tomorrow would bring confrontation, negotiation, the beginning of a complex recalibration of family dynamics. It wouldn't be easy. Decades of established patterns wouldn't change overnight, and Howard's attempt to have me declared incompetent had added a bitter note to an already difficult situation. But as I sat there, something settled within me, a certainty that hadn't existed 6 weeks ago. Whatever happened with Howard, with Olivia, with Madison, I would never again make myself small to accommodate their expectations. I would never again accept invisibility as the price of family peace. I would never again believe that my worth was measured only in what I could give others. My phone buzzed with a text message from Josephine. Landed safely? The villa is too quiet without you. Boston awaits whenever you're ready for your next adventure. I smiled, typing back. Safe, but tired. Fighting jet lag and preparing for battle with the family tomorrow. Boston sounds wonderful for fall. Another message arrived. This one from Martin. Courage, dear Ginny. Remember who you became in Tuscany. Don't let them make you forget. I wouldn't forget. The woman who had walked alone through Italian olive groves, who had laughed under Tuscan stars, who had found friendship and possibility when she least expected it. That woman was now as real to me as the dutiful nurse, mother, and grandmother I'd been for decades. More real, perhaps, because she had been chosen rather than assigned. As night deepened outside my window, I opened my suitcase and carefully removed the watercolor Martin had painted. I found a thumbtack in a kitchen drawer and pinned it to the blank wall opposite my bed, where it would be the first thing I'd see each morning. A reminder of the woman I'd discovered in Italy. A promise to myself about the woman I intended to remain in Portland. Whatever tomorrow brought, I would face it as Ginny, just Ginny, with all that entailed. And for the first time in decades, that felt like more than enough. It felt like everything. Morning arrived with the particular clarity that follows jet lag, as if sleep's brevity had somehow sharpened my perceptions. The Portland summer light filtered through my curtains differently than the Tuscan sun. Cooler, more tentative, but beautiful in its own way. I made coffee and carried it to my small balcony, looking out at the city I'd called home for most of my life. 3 days of recovery. That's what Ruth and I had agreed I deserved before confronting Howard and Olivia. 3 days to readjust to Pacific time, to gather my thoughts, to prepare my defense. But as I sipped my coffee, I realized I didn't want to wait. The woman who'd emerged in Italy, decisive, clear-eyed, unwilling to defer her own needs, was impatient to resolve the lingering family drama so she could get on with the business of living. I called Ruth first, then Howard. By noon, a meeting was arranged at Ruth's house. Neutral territory, as Ruth had insisted, with her cousin Sylvia, the elder law attorney, present to represent my interests. Howard had balked at this last condition, but eventually conceded when I made it clear I wouldn't meet without legal representation, given his threats to have me declared incompetent. Ruth's home in Selwood had always been a haven, a craftsman bungalow filled with books and art collected over decades of thoughtful living. Today, its warm familiarity helped steady my nerves as I waited in her living room, Sylvia beside me reviewing documents and offering last-minute advice. "Remember, you're not on trial here," she emphasized, her silver bob swinging as she leaned forward. "You're a competent adult making choices about your own life and finances. They're the ones who need to justify their interference, not the other way around." Howard arrived first, looking both imperious and uncomfortable in the way of men unused to having their authority questioned. Age had not softened his sharp features or dimmed the calculating gleam in his eyes. He greeted me with a curt nod, as if we were business associates rather than people who had once built a life together. Olivia followed minutes later, her resemblance to me momentarily startling after weeks away. She'd styled her hair differently, shorter, more sophisticated, and her designer clothes spoke of the corporate success she'd pursued so relentlessly. But beneath the polished exterior, I caught a glimpse of uncertainty in her eyes as she took in my appearance. "You look rested," she said, the surprise in her voice impossible to miss. Before I could respond, the front door opened again and Madison stepped in. No one had mentioned she would be attending, and from the stiffening of Howard's posture, I gathered her presence wasn't part of his plan. My granddaughter stood awkwardly in the entrance, her confident law school demeanor replaced by something more tentative. "I hope it's okay that I'm here," she said, addressing me directly. I thought I should be part of the conversation. Ruth, ever the gracious hostess, welcomed everyone to sit around her dining table, where she'd arranged water, coffee, and her famous lemon cookies that no one touched. Sylvia placed a recorder in the center after receiving nods of consent from everyone present. Howard began without preamble, his voice slipping into the authoritative tone he'd used throughout our marriage. "Virginia, while we're relieved to see you've returned safely, your behavior over the past 2 months has raised serious concerns about your judgment. Disappearing to Europe without notice, depleting your savings, refusing to respond to urgent family communications. These are not the actions of the responsible woman we've known." Beside him, Olivia nodded, though less emphatically than I expected. Madison remained still, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. "What Howard means," Olivia interjected, her corporate diplomacy evident, "is that we've been worried about you, Mom. It's not like you to act so impulsively." "That's where you're wrong," I said quietly, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "You're not concerned about my well-being. You're concerned about my compliance. There's a significant difference." Howard's face reddened. "Now, Virginia—" "I'm not finished," I continued, the authority in my tone stopping him mid-sentence. "A novel experience for us both. For most of my adult life, I've been predictable because I've prioritized everyone else's needs above my own. I worked night shifts and holidays as a nurse, so other staff could be with their families. I put you through business school, Howard, postponing my own education. I helped raise Madison, while Olivia built her career. I saved for decades to give Madison a financial start in life." I took a sip of water, gathering my thoughts. None of these choices were wrong, and I don't regret them. But they established a pattern where my family came to see my self-sacrifice not as generous giving but as an obligation. My natural role in the family system. Madison shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her eyes lowering to the table. "When I finally chose myself, when I canceled a check I could no longer give in good conscience and decided to use my own savings for my own joy, it disrupted that system. And instead of recognizing my right to make that choice, you pathologized it. You called it a mental break. You threatened legal action to regain control of my decisions." Sylvia nodded approvingly beside me, her presence bolstering my resolve. "Mom," Olivia began, her voice softer now, "you have to understand how it looked from our perspective. You've never traveled abroad before. You've never made major financial decisions without consulting us. You've always been dependable. Dependable, I repeated, tasting the word. Like a reliable appliance. Always functioning as expected, without needs or desires of its own. Howard straightened, his businessman's instinct for negotiation taking over. Look, Virginia, no one is questioning your right to enjoy your retirement. But surely you can understand our concern when you abruptly canceled Madison's promised gift and disappeared to Europe without discussion. That money was intended for Madison's future. No, I corrected him. That money was saved by me, from my earnings, for a purpose I chose. When that purpose no longer felt appropriate, I redirected it. That's not mental instability, that's financial autonomy. Madison spoke for the first time, her voice smaller than I was accustomed to hearing it. Grandma, about what happened at graduation, I want to apologize. What I said was cruel and ungrateful, and I've been ashamed ever since. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to her. This wasn't in the script Howard had planned. I could see it in his clenched jaw. I was showing off for people I thought mattered, she continued. Camilla's friends were there, and some partners from the law firm where I wanted to intern. I was trying so hard to fit into their world that I rejected the person who's always supported me unconditionally. The rawness in her admission loosened something in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but an opening where forgiveness might eventually grow. Thank you for saying that, I replied simply. It means a lot to hear. Howard, visibly frustrated by this detour into genuine emotion, attempted to redirect the conversation. While apologies are all well and good, they don't address the concerning pattern of behavior. Virginia, we're prepared to drop any legal considerations if you'll agree to certain conditions. Sylvia's pen stopped its note-taking as she looked up sharply. Conditions? Financial oversight, he stated, as if it were a reasonable request. Joint decision-making for major expenditures. Regular medical checkups to ensure continued cognitive health. In other words, Sylvia translated, my client should surrender her financial independence because she chose to spend her own money on herself rather than giving it to her granddaughter. That's not how the law works, Mr. Harlow. Unless you have actual evidence of cognitive impairment, not just decisions you disagree with, you have no grounds for the kind of control you're suggesting. Ruth, who had been quietly observing until now, placed a hand on mine. Howard, Olivia, I've known Ginny for over 40 years. The woman who went to Italy wasn't having a breakdown. She was finally having a breakthrough. If anything, she's thinking more clearly now than she has in decades. Olivia glanced between her father and me, clearly torn. Dad, maybe we should reconsider this approach. Mom seems perfectly rational, and Sylvia's right. We don't have any medical evidence to suggest otherwise. Howard's expression hardened. So, we're just supposed to accept that at 72, Virginia has suddenly decided to abandon all family responsibility and gallivant around Europe spending money meant for Madison's future? First of all, I interrupted, 72 isn't dead, Howard. It's not even particularly old anymore. I could easily live another 20 years, and I intend to live them fully, not as an ATM for the family or a convenient babysitter. Madison winced at this, and I realized she had indeed often treated me as both those things. Second, I continued, I haven't abandoned family responsibility. I've redefined it. My responsibility to my family includes modeling self-respect and appropriate boundaries. It includes showing my granddaughter that a woman's value doesn't decrease with age and that her desires don't become less legitimate once her reproductive years are behind her. The words flowed with a clarity that surprised even me. Thoughts that had crystallized during quiet moments in Tuscany, but that I hadn't yet articulated so directly. I love you all, I said, softening my tone. That hasn't changed, but how I express that love will be different now. I won't give at the expense of my own well-being. I won't accept dismissal or disrespect as the price of family inclusion, and I won't apologize for claiming the same autonomy that each of you takes for granted. A heavy silence settled over Ruth's dining room. Outside, a lawnmower hummed, and somewhere a dog barked. Ordinary sounds from an ordinary day, continuing regardless of our family drama. Madison was the first to break the silence. Grandma's right, she said, her voice gaining strength. We've treated her like she exists to serve our needs. Even I've been guilty of it, taking her support for granted while being embarrassed by her in front of people whose approval I wanted. She turned to face Howard directly. Grandpa, this isn't about cognitive decline, and you know it. It's about control. You're using the same tactics you used in the divorce, trying to make Grandma seem unstable because she's not behaving the way you want her to. Howard's face flushed darker. That's completely inappropriate, Madison. You have no idea what happened in our marriage. I know enough, she replied with surprising firmness. And I know what I saw at my graduation and in the weeks after. We've all been treating Grandma terribly, and now we're angry because she won't let us anymore. Olivia looked stricken, caught between her father's authority and her daughter's unexpected clarity. Madison, that's not fair. We've been worried about Grandma's well-being. Have we? Madison challenged. Or have we been worried about the check she canceled? About the money we thought we were entitled to? About the way her independence inconveniences us? The blunt assessment from the youngest person at the table shifted something in the room's atmosphere. Howard's rigid certainty seemed to deflate slightly, while Olivia's professional composure cracked to reveal genuine distress. Sylvia, ever the pragmatic attorney, seized the moment to redirect toward resolution. Since there appears to be no medical evidence supporting concerns about Ms. Harlow's competence, I suggest we focus on establishing healthy boundaries moving forward. Virginia has expressed willingness to maintain family relationships, just on more equitable terms. The next hour unfolded with less hostility than the meeting had begun with. Howard eventually conceded that legal action would be inappropriate, though his grudging acceptance made it clear he still viewed my choices as a personal betrayal. Olivia, more adaptable by nature, seemed to genuinely reflect on the dynamics Madison had highlighted. As for Madison herself, her unexpected advocacy on my behalf revealed a maturity I hadn't given her credit for. When the formal part of the meeting concluded, she asked if she could speak with me privately on Ruth's back porch. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since graduation," she said once we were alone, the summer air warm around us. "At first, I was just angry about the money. Then I was embarrassed about what I'd said to you. But eventually, I started really examining why I said it." She traced patterns on the porch railing, avoiding my eyes. "Law school teaches you to question underlying assumptions, to look for the hidden motivations behind what people say and do. When I turned that lens on myself, I didn't like what I saw." "Which was?" I prompted gently. "A person who valued status and appearance over genuine connection. Someone who'd absorbed Camilla's values without questioning them. Someone who was embarrassed by the very qualities in you that I should have been most proud of: your work ethic, your integrity, your genuine care for others." Her candor touched me deeply. This wasn't a calculated apology designed to restore access to my savings. This was genuine self-reflection from a young woman just beginning to define her own values. "The irony," she continued with a small, sad smile, "is that the day after graduation, the managing partner at the firm where I wanted to work mentioned how impressed he was by your career. His mother had been a nurse, and he said it was the hardest, most honorable work he could imagine. While I was busy being ashamed of you, others were admiring exactly what I was trying to hide." We talked for nearly an hour on that porch, beginning the delicate work of rebuilding our relationship on more authentic terms. No, I wouldn't be reinstating the check. That money had already been partially spent on my travels and would continue to fund the life I was creating for myself. But I offered something perhaps more valuable: the truth of my experience, without sugarcoating or self-censorship. By the time Howard and Olivia left Ruth's house, a fragile truce had been established. No legal action would be pursued. Family gatherings would continue, though perhaps with different expectations on all sides. I would share my travel plans as a courtesy, not for permission. They would respect my financial decisions as mine alone to make. In the weeks that followed, I began actively creating the life I wanted rather than accepting the life assigned to me. I hired painters to transform my apartment with colors inspired by the Mediterranean: warm terracotta for the living room, the blue of the Aegean for my bedroom, soft Tuscan yellow for the kitchen. I enrolled in an art therapy certification program at Portland State University, formalizing the interest that had awakened in Italy. Most significantly, I put a deposit on a small but sun-filled condo overlooking the Willamette River, a place chosen for beauty rather than mere functionality, with a spare bedroom for visiting friends and a balcony large enough for morning coffee and evening wine. The monthly payments would reduce what I could leave to Olivia and Madison someday. But as I told Sylvia while signing the mortgage documents, my legacy won't just be financial. It will be the example I set by living fully until the end. Ruth helped me move, as did Madison, whose efforts to rebuild our relationship seemed genuine, if occasionally awkward. Olivia visited the new place with a housewarming gift, a painting by a local artist that she'd clearly selected with care, suggesting she too was making an effort to see me as a person with tastes and preferences, not just a role in the family system. Howard kept his distance, which was its own kind of gift. We would never fully reconcile, but the heat had gone out of his anger, replaced by a grudging acceptance that I was, finally and irrevocably, beyond his control. Autumn arrived with its characteristic Portland mist, softening the edges of my new neighborhood. On a crisp October morning, I sat on my balcony with coffee, watching early light sparkle on the river, when my phone chimed with a message from Josephine. Boston's fall colors are at their peak. My guest room awaits. Ruth is welcome too. The late bloomers plan a reunion at Thanksgiving if you can extend your stay. Say yes. The invitation sent a thrill of anticipation through me. Just 6 months earlier, such a spontaneous plan would have been unthinkable, suppressed before it could even form into conscious desire. Now it felt not just possible, but necessary, another step in the continuing expansion of my life. I called Ruth immediately, and by that evening, our flights were booked for a 3-week East Coast adventure. I would miss Madison's birthday dinner, a fact I noted with fleeting guilt before reminding myself that priorities work both ways. For decades, I'd arranged my life around family calendars. Now they could occasionally accommodate mine. When I told Madison about the trip, her response surprised me. "That sounds amazing, Grandma. Take lots of pictures, okay? And maybe next time. If there's room for one more, I'd love to meet these friends of yours." The request, tentative but sincere, suggested a possibility I hadn't considered, that my liberation might create ripple effects, showing others in my family different ways to live, to age, to define success and fulfillment. On my last evening before leaving for Boston, I stood in my new living room, surrounded by the life I was actively creating. Photos from Italy shared wall space with local art and the first of my own watercolor attempts. Books on art therapy and travel guides crowded my shelves alongside medical mysteries. A bottle of Tuscan wine waited to be shared with Ruth before our early morning departure. At 72, nearly 73 now, I had discovered that it's never too late to bloom. Never too late to stand firmly in your own worthiness. Never too late to expect and require respect. Never too late to redirect the course of your life toward joy. The woman who had waited obediently in a parking lot because her granddaughter had said, "You shame me," had transformed into someone who knew her own value. Not because the Italian's son had worked some magical change, but because the hurt had finally been great enough to crack open decades of accommodating silence, allowing a truer self to emerge. As twilight settled over Portland, I raised a glass to that emergence, to the journey still unfolding, to the woman I was still becoming. The road ahead would have its challenges. Family dynamics rarely transform without occasional relapses, and aging brings its own inescapable difficulties. But I would face those challenges as Ginny, just Ginny, standing firmly in my own worth, surrounded by chosen family as well as born family, rich in experiences, if not in bank accounts. Some might call it a late awakening, but I preferred to think of it as right on time. After all, the most beautiful gardens often save their most spectacular blooms for the latter part of the season. If you've enjoyed my story of self-discovery and standing up for myself, please hit that subscribe button and join me for more honest conversations about life's later chapters. And if you know someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to bloom, share this video with them. Your support means everything to me on this journey.